My name is Connie Buscha, and I just recently received my PhD in geography. This is part of my dissertation research. And my background primarily, though, is in sociology and history. So that's why I've kind of circled back around from the focus of my geography dissertation, which was geographies of care, to now a more classical kind of look at a sociological explanation potentially for military sexual violence. So the topic of my talk today is neoliberalism, the all-volunteer force, and contemporary military sexual violence. This is the abstract. Obviously, we're going to go through all of the different components of it. And if y'all would like me to make available these slides, just let me know and I'm happy to do so. So basically, why am I here? Why study this particular phenomenon? I think Pat really nailed it when she said, it's just horrific, the things that we hear about what's going on in the military, particularly these days. And we need to study this, like Laura said, because symbiotically militaries of democracies are staffed by citizen warriors. We represent as well as serve. So therefore we see military service as a civic responsibility. And along with that, of course, there are certain expectations. The perception of the military presence within the broader community, they don't want to see bad conduct out of people. It seems like when a person goes off and joins the military, they're kind of viewed as having gone through this rite of passage that transforms them into another human being, another type of person. However, most of them are still just very young adults trying to figure out their way in the world. And again, we don't want to see bad conduct out of them. And particularly in this case, we're looking at the issue of sexual violence against women. Proximate civilian communities where these bases and installations are located, they don't want criminal behavior. Not in my backyard. They just don't want these type of activities there. The Department of Defense, of course, doesn't want bad press, and they don't want a reduction in readiness, all of the ancillary issues that result from this issue of sexual violence in the ranks. And American society, of course, all of us as citizens, we don't want victimization of our service people. We do have a rank structure, of course, in the military. There's a hierarchy, very strict. There are core values, and we have the Uniform Code of Military Justice that provides a very strong structure, very specific expectations, lines that are not supposed to be crossed. But within all of this, of course, we have agency. We have individuals acting on their rational and irrational beliefs and expectations, and their performance in these environments is sometimes erratic. And goes beyond the expectations of the morality, if you will, and the expectations of the judicial system in the military. So the question then is, why do they sometimes behave so badly, especially that it becomes an international or national incident on the news, where we have military service members victimized by their peers and their leaders. So what I'm hoping through my research is providing a nuanced interpretation of this phenomenon of military sexual violence. I'm hoping to address the underlying cultures and the systems and the behaviors that are going on within these environments. And I believe, without a doubt, I'm providing a novel lens through which we may look at military sexual violence. And I'm hoping that that's going to be a way for us to look at other ways to mitigate this phenomenon, since what we've done so far has really not worked. I think it has failed rather phenomenally. So the introduction is, we see military sexual violence as America's dirty little secret. It's one of those things that the lid was blown off of really by the Tailhook Convention in Las Vegas in 1991. We see it as rape in the family. These men and women enter the military with the expectation that they're entering a band of brothers and sisters. So there is this kind of incestuous situation when we have military sexual violence, brothers and sisters fathers, leaders. It just becomes very incestuous. So situation management, it's very difficult because of the underreporting of sexual violence incidents. The complication also of how do we define it? The Bureau of Justice Statistics and the FBI expanded phenomenally their definitions in 2011. And even those two different organizations don't have 100% consistent definitions of what is military sexual violence. And of course, how to capture the complexity of this. It's a very personal situation when someone is sexually violated at whatever place of the spectrum, from rather benign to the most egregious. And then the military sexual violence reporting process is another issue that the Department of Defense and others have begun to tackle. How do we really get a handle on how women can safely and effectively navigate a system of securing justice, having some kind of catharsis? It's just a very complex process. And then, of course, the mitigation management. We have legislation which offers benevolent protection of women and others, men included, so that people are not violated. Of course, the goal being that they will be personally safe and professionally able to advance through the ranks and have successful careers and happy lives. The mass media as a mitigation tool, not very successful. They primarily provide titillating vignettes and often without context. You know, you'll see, they call it news for a reason. Something pops up and that's what they're going to deal with for a while. And then it kind of spreads like a wildfire. And then it might go back into the bushes until something else pops up. And so that's really what we have with the media. There's not a strong background of providing solid information in any kind of historical frame of reference for this situation of MSV. And then, of course, we have the activists who either are advocates, which is fantastic, or on the opposite end, perhaps they have agendas that are not necessarily serving with the best interest, the groups that we're discussing today. And my focus today, y'all, is predominantly on women. I mean, that's really what my focus is. I spoke to women. That's not to say that there are not other groups out there that are just as worthy of this discussion, but my focus is primarily, well, predominantly on women today. So the research question then, as we look at all this, is the US military steeped in moral mandates and grounded in familial relationships. Why do they continue to experience sexual violence? We have Gemeinschaft, if we're going to go way back to looking at societies and culture. Military members value cohesion, obedience, discipline, camaraderie, and the expectation is altruism and self-sacrifice. Citizen warriors, as I mentioned earlier, they come from American society into this smaller place. The military is a microcosm. Historically, it's a male masculine exercise. I am not saying that women were not participants at all. There were women, of course, in a variety of roles throughout the history of America and fighting and war fighting and peacekeeping. But when we're looking at bases and we're looking at combat theaters, it was primarily a male and masculine exercise. In the military, of course, they exert necessary violence, but there is not an absence of morality and care. Band of Brothers, there's a lot of care, there's a lot of morality. A lot of people have talked about it being homoerotic or homoerotic, with men almost being too physical and too emotional with one another to be truly masculine. That's not a path we're going to go down today, but please understand that the military, especially in my view, is this place steeped in violence, but there's also this very deep caring and love and affection for each other, for your peers and everyone that you're involved with there. Integration of women is a result of women's expansion of their place in society. Successful military service challenges essentialism and patriarchy. This was intended, the inclusion of women, to eradicate patriarchy, for women to be able to stand on their own feet, they're in their own boots, and have their own military careers. And then through that enactment of their rights and responsibilities of citizenship, they would have the commensurate rewards in civilian society to become truly equal with men. However, what we see in the contemporary military is that they still face sex and gender-based bias, discrimination. Othering is the word I like to use, just because they are kind of still viewed as this other animal that kind of emerged into this place. And what do we really do with this situation? They experience different types of oppression and violence than men, and also within different frameworks, especially, like I said, being othered, being excluded. The experience of military sexual violence is both criminal and moral. We'll see that in terms of the UCMJ and other laws, but it's also this moral violation, this incestuous situation within their peer groups. So I've come from this from a pragmatic theoretical framework, a perspective. The people that I've worked with are almost exclusively feminist, and they're not mutually exclusive. I want to make that clear. From my lens, though, my pragmatic lens, we see things as emerging. Herbert Mead, of course, in 1938 was the one that really said that when things come together, in this case, people, something is going to arise that wasn't there before. We're constantly negotiating. And the evolution of the human species and humanity is nothing but along a complex process of emergence, constantly working together, fighting, conflict, all of these things, something new is emerging. Dr. Shields actually introduced me to David Brindell in the 4 Ps framework. He says that this framework, this intellectual terrain in which we navigate, it's practical, pluralistic, participatory, and provisional. All of those are very important because it's the way that we live and deal with each other on a daily basis. Instead of us being acted upon, we're executing personal agency in every interaction that we face, the decisions that we make. Sure, we're also acting from habits, but we have this opportunity to reflect, make a choice, and take an action. It gives a way to an opposing approach. Okay, so instead of us just living in our own minds, we have an opportunity now when we're faced with something to make a change, to negotiate something, to have that emergence, to create a different situation, a different outcome. And this pragmatic intelligence is creative. It's not a routine mechanic. We can look at the way we've developed the runaway species, as it were. It's a creative intelligence. In systems, especially pragmatic ones, are characterized by feedback. Homeoresis, where we have positive feedback, changes the system, or negative feedback just leads to the integration of the system and its maintaining of itself. Literature review. Now, normally, y'all read in the abstract, I'm sure, that I'm using classical grounded theory, and there's a couple of different ways to look at that. One is that there should be no literature review. You walk into a situation, you gather data, and then you come out with, hopefully theory. That's just not even reasonable. So, of course, what I've done is go to the literature to look at the military and a couple of other issues as we'll go through here. First thing is the military environments. They're extremely complex because it's the sanctioned use of force against designated others. Okay, militaries are not new. They've been around forever, from clans and tribes to the militaries that we have today. The exertion of force is not new. However, we are held to a higher moral standard than civilians, okay, with great responsibility, come with great, you know what I'm saying? I can't get it out right now. But anyway, we're held to a higher moral standard, and it's unique. We could probably look at police forces as most similar, but this is massive. This is not a one-on-one kind of situation. So there is a unique status, unique challenges, and strict moral requirements. The formal mandates are truth, keeping promises, respecting property, and preserving life, while also destroying things and killing people. So just the situation of these young people being in these military environments is very complex just because of those basic things. Military rape, as an extension into this, is it's always been associated with war fighting. It's a tool of terror and used to humiliate enemies. It's a source of has been a source of reproductive resources. We still see this today in like Boko Haram, and we can't really say that that's the case in Western militaries, not at all. But within contemporary militaries, we are faced with potentially a warrior ethos, hypermasculinity, military operational and occupational stress, and the numerical sex and gender imbalance as potentially being contributors to military rape and why the situation keeps occurring, military sexual violence. Military members tend to be isolated from society. Even though they came from society, they're now separated from it on these islands, if you will. There's no in loco parentis. They have the rules, obviously, that are very well established. But the people who are acting in like parental or leadership roles are this almost the same age as them. And also there's this issue of transiency. There's not necessarily consistency in leadership and the way that the rules are maintained. We also have excessive alcohol consumption, which is a notorious problem. And we also have risky sexual behaviors that we obviously see contributing to this military sexual violence issue. So my methodology then was classical grounded theory, where I'm trying to use inductive reasoning to formulate, I hope, a theory from the data that I've obtained. It's exploratory, so please bear with me on that. This is not by any means some final solution to MSV. It's an attempt to clarify the nature of the problem so that we can then look at ways to solve it and mitigate. My admission of bias. The expression of victimization may be shameful and embarrassing. Some people may embellish their stories. Some people may not tell us all the truth. That's one of the situations really with any kind of qualitative research. Maybe you're not getting the whole picture. You're getting some kind of bias from the individuals with whom you're speaking. As a former Marine myself, I do have an affinity with other female military service members. However, I like to believe that there's such a distance in time that I really don't feel like I'm including myself in my work. I'm actually learning more than I feel like I'm including myself. And the IRB requirement that I had to meet, where I had to put very specific information in my solicitation, I believe may have led to either platform or cathartic seeking participation. Women who wanted to either say something very firmly because they felt extremely strongly about it, or maybe they were looking for some way of self-soothing through this process and perhaps leading to some kind of healing for themselves. I did do semi-structured interviews. My N was 20. I felt like I reached saturation at that point because I started to see these same kinds of themes emerging through many different narratives that I was able to obtain. Respondents self-selected and snowballed, but I did have gatekeepers initially that used social media and promoted my research in VA medical facilities. Through the coding, of course, there was the emergence of themes. We're only going to look at 2 today just because it's so massive. And there was an internal creation of cohorts. I'll show you that. And the data analysis, of course, required a return to a substantial expansion of the literature from what I just very briefly showed you about military environments and military rape. So here's just a breakdown of the data. This is what my primary little framework was from which I could look at what am I going to deal with here. What I want y'all to see particularly is the oldest interviewee I had was age 74, and she entered the military in 1964, the year that I was born. I thought that was ironic. And the youngest we have was Riley, and she's 23 years old, and her year of entry was 2016, which was while I was still doing my research, my initial dissertation work. What I want y'all to see in this right here is When we look at Florence, her age was 58, and then Rita was 40. So we have an 18-year break right here, a natural break in the data. It's pretty ironic that it happened that way. And we also see that looking over a little bit, the year of entry is almost the same. It's a 19-year break. And what this allowed me to do was break down this group into generational cohorts. Again, qualitative data, I cannot extrapolate to a larger population, but it's interesting the way all of this broke down into these different cohorts. So basically, I have baby boomers, and then I looked at this as non-baby boomers, the post-baby boomers. And before we move on, I want you to look down here into the non-baby boomer, the post-baby boomer group, and look at all the money for college. This really wasn't an option for those women who were the baby boomers. So what we see a lot down here is, why did they enter? Money for college, money for college, money for college. That's going to figure in a little later as we're going to go through this discussion. But I just wanted to show you all this breakdown. A lot of folks from Texas, because my research was done in Texas, but we do have some other ladies from other places. And it was predominantly the United States Army that was overrepresented in the data. So the first emergent theme that came out of all of these interviews, these 20 interviews, was related to sex generally. And my focus here, just to show y'all about the coding, was adultery. The first level coding was open, second level coding was axial, and then the third level coding was the theoretical. It's where I'm trying to go from data pieces to what does this mean experientially, and then how does all of this tie together into a belief and a behavior kind of structure. So that is just an example of the emergence of adultery as one of the topics we're going to talk about. Another thing that I really did after I looked at the breakdown of the women and when they entered and this money issue, why they entered, was I went back and did a content analysis of how these women are drawn into the military. What is the mechanism for their recruitment? And so over here, we have this classic Uncle Sam poster, I want you. Recruiting was very general. Even during the wars, it was like, support your country, buy savings bond. For women, free a man to fight. The expectation was, you're not coming to stay. You're coming here temporarily to free this man to fight. And so what we have here is, I believe, emergent neoliberalism, where we go from a very civic focused platform, recruitment mechanism, to what's your warrior? Very specific, very personalized. And then over here, security benefits, security for now, benefits for now, security for your future. So we have over here all of the benefits that equate to financial benefits on the right while you're in. And then over here, other ones too. We have housing, vacation, education, of course, which is what we saw in our data list, our demographics. And then, of course, VA loans. So these are just two, and I looked at many, 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 but these are the examples I wanted to show y'all. Down here, we have the Marine Corps, the answer to a nation's call. In looking at all of these different recruitment tools, the Marine Corps seemed to stay the most true to this more general civic-minded focus on how to draw people into their particular branch of service. So I've got all of this going on, and now I'm thinking, putting the pieces together, how in the world am I going to look at this topic, this phenomenon of military sexual violence? So up here I have just the Green Army men, the Geneva Convention, bunch of sailors partying, money, Army values tailhook. And then we get into some interesting things here, and we have a woman in Abu Ghraib. Y'all remember Lindy England? She's really like the first woman who has emerged as a sexual sadist in a military environment. And then, of course, we have this woman over here who is representative of so many who were apparently sexually experienced sexual violence and then were murdered. So what do we do with all this? I had to look at this and say, okay, there's something going on, it looks like, between maybe these generations. And then I'm thinking it's neoliberalism. This transition from being very civic minded and this concept of military service as a responsibility to something that's more of a individual gain, particularly financial gain focus, especially in recruiting, and then what the expectations are. You serve, and then you get you get your benefits while you're in, and then you get more benefits when you get out. So in 1973, we had Nixon, who ended the draft. In 1974, we had the all volunteer force, which really kicked the door open for the entrance of women into all MOSs except combat. At the time of this, top military officials and a number of others had serious reservations against the all volunteer force. They were concerned. Down here we have Janowitz and we have Moskos. They were very concerned that this focus on financial gain and more relaxed standards would have a negative impact on the quality of service and cohesion in particular. So this shift, though, was enacted, and the Army increased pay, relaxed grooming standards, and began to market itself, just like we saw in those ads, emphasizing individual opportunity and personal enrichment. The AVF also seemed to privilege individual choice over the obligation of citizens and relied on market research. So there's a very distinct shift. We're not going to be able to talk about the draft today, but that's also something that I'm saving for future research, where I have to fit that into all of this transition from the original, the pre-AVF to what we have now. So with the exception of the Marine Corps, like I said earlier, it seems like we have a loosening of the sense of commitment and cohesion. Not that people are in the military and are not committed. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. I'm just saying it seems like generally we have kind of a different way of looking at military service. And so I'm thinking for this research, I adopted the Army's definition of military cohesion as the bonding together of members of an organization in such a way as to sustain their will and their commitment to each other. I want to focus on that, their commitment to each other, their unit, and their mission. So just to show you, I have Sue up here. She was the oldest woman who I interviewed, the oldest veteran, and she was actually in Vietnam. A lot of people would not know that there were so many women on the ground in Vietnam who were not medical staff. She said that they were under mortar attack when she arrived. She said, "Oh, look what the plane brought us, a whore. That was my welcome to Vietnam." She said that was one of the guys said. And then she says, "They see me, they see their mother, their girlfriend, their wife, sister. I don't care who he is. All of a sudden, I'm somebody else in their life and they want to touch me. They just want to touch me." And a lot of them, the second they would touch me, they would ejaculate right into their fatigues. This is really hard for a 19-year-old to take. So this is the woman who entered in 1964, I believe it was. And she had no sexual experience. And so this was her really going into an alien environment, Vietnam, war zone, and now dealing with these men in this manner. And another time, she also talked about women were property back then. She said they didn't sell us or barter us like slaves. She said there was still this expectation that women had their place and that decisions were made for them. And so that was Sue, one of our baby boomers. And then we have Willow, our post-baby boomer. And she's talking about women are lesser, okay? And this conflict about what women really are. She says, you know, the expectation maybe is to be fragile and petite and precious. You know, men want to have these wives that are like that. And she said, things that are not like your fellow soldier. If society expects the military to treat us like exact equals, either disconnect them, the men, from society completely so they don't see this like, oh, look at women as objects still when you're in your free time. So there's this confusion about roles. And then Grace takes it a step further and she says, we're bitches and hoes. It's very constant in the rhetoric of women. So these women feel like they're not being seen as the equivalents or the equals to men. They're not seen as soldiers, airmen, and Marines. They're seen as others. And so the neoliberalism, I believe, individualism, it allows, if not encourages, people to place their own wants and needs and desires. And Paul even says it's outside the constraints or limits of tradition. Yes, we know what the rules are, but maybe now we can bend the rules a little bit more. Maybe we can take a little bit more liberties. And there's this gendered exclusionary othering that we just talked about. And there's conflicting moral tenets that the women talk about. Specifically, they talk about mistrust of authority figures and colleagues. These quotes that I'm providing y'all today are only just tiny snippets, and Pat would be able to tell you that, of this very rich, just crazy amount of data and information they give about the complexity of their lives in these military environments. So this issue of mistrust kept coming up. And Patrice in particular says, it's an unspoken oath that when he was going to protect you, he was going to be like your brother, her male peer. And when that guy, approaches you, that creepy guy in the corner, he was going to step up and tell the creepy guy to go away. And it turns out he's the creepy guy. So this leads us to the issues of sexual arenas and what I believe has happened with the all-volunteer force, inadvertently creating what is called a sexual arena. The inclusion of women, we're opening up the door, women are coming in, this is where we're going to house them, this is what we're going to do. There obviously was a plan, right? But the additional cohort of actors introduced into these environmental stressors, youth immaturity, they're away from home, job stress. The complication, all of this created sexual arenas. Sexuality is now enacted within military environments of home, work, and leisure by the 24/7 proximity of military men and women. I'm not going to give y'all data in the form of interview text today, but it's amazing what you hear about the sexual activity happening in combat zones, in Iraq and Afghanistan. People having sex in porta potties, the problems that causes within the combat theater. But we're just going to stick right now to this very basic discussion so we can kind of figure out this whole thing of what to even do about this. Sexual behaviors between colleagues disrupts good order and discipline in ways previously unknown in an almost exclusively male environment. Disruptive activities that we're looking at today specifically are hooking up, power sex, and of course, adultery that y'all saw from my example of the coding. So what is hooking up? Research on adolescents say that this is a new sexual script. If you look down a little bit farther, it says relationships today are considered too time and resource consuming. So hooking up is any sexual behavior outside of a relationship. Research has found that many people tend to age out of it. It's something that typically happens when people are young. But I think if we look at the data and the research about things like Tinder and all of these other dating sites, particularly for the older groups, they also kind of have a hookup culture of their own. So it's not exclusively, I don't believe, aging, but there's obviously a lot of work to be done on that. And this is fairly new. Compared to dating, which was the standard since World War II, this is a distinctly different ordering of sexual activity and romance, where sex precedes romantic involvement, if at all. One night stands, not a new thing, but this hookup thing is quite a new animal here. It implies a lack of any necessary pre or post-sex intention to pursue further contact. It marks an increased acceptance of non-relational sex in American culture. So here's a list of quotes that have to do with the consequences. Lauren talks about the gossip. She says, sex in the barracks, non-judicial punishment. She says, so I think, not thinking in the moment like, hey, we're all just having fun, having a good time, hook up. But it doesn't work like that when you work, live, sleep, and eat with these people. You can't escape. Your home life is your work life. So we see that women in the literature have always been labeled either like bitch or a slut or a lesbian. Those were like the first three categories I think that were identified. This is still going on, where you have these women who engage in this hookup culture being identified as slut, if you will. Rachel says there's more of a psychological aspect of this. She says we mess ourselves up because you keep longing for that connection or dismiss it and say, I don't need it because, I just need this one thing from this person, meaning sex. It's really scary. Janet says if you started sleeping around with them, they, the males, were all going to do it, meaning trying to seduce you. So now we have this intense sexual pursuit based upon this hookup culture. And Colette says she takes it even a step farther and talks about leadership and how this really can violate the chain of command. She says, if you gave off the right signals and the right energy, your leadership, the people who were permanent party, who were meant to be your mentors and your guidance and your disciplinarians, the people that you were to get help from would take advantage of that. She says specifically, they would come for you. And then Lauren, we're circling back to her again. She says, you can be the one that everyone wants, but you can never be the one that everybody's had because you'll never get respected. Another theme that came out related to the sexual arenas is power sex. And we talk about human action is only moral when there's an understanding between people, when reasons and not only desires, instincts, or emotions guide the action. There's some kind of a rational understanding of what we're doing, what our behaviors are. Sex is pragmatic. This power sex is pragmatic. It's using sex to take, though, to exploit or gain favors. And it's using people as a means to an end. Melinda says it's alluring. I believe she was a logistics officer, as a matter of fact. She says it's alluring to have sex with someone who's higher ranking than you, but there's also some power dynamics with having sex with someone lower ranking with you. The UCMJ's perspective on all of it is that the higher ranking person is always wrong because they have all the power. And then I asked about, what would a young person gain by having sex with someone? And she said particularly in this case, a captain, she said the power associated with having had a captain, bragging rights. Just the rumor of it increased her stature amongst her peer group. So that's power sex, where they're using each other to have this status within their group. Patrice kind of looks at it a different way, and she's talking about women in the military still playing the girl card. She says, they ask for some help and they kind of bat their eyes a little bit. And she said, some dude will probably be nice and help her. And then she says she gets away with it. So then she continues to do it. And she actually labeled this called standing at parade pretty. I don't know if y'all know what parade rest is, but she kind of uses a play on words and calls this standing at parade pretty. A woman manipulating the situation, manipulating the men in particular, to have them help her to do some kind of work or something that she doesn't want to do. Then we have adultery. And of course, adultery is defined by the UCMJ as sexual intercourse when the parties are not married to each other and at least one of them is married to someone else. It is conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. That is exactly stated. There's really no civilian analog to this. Adultery and fraternization really became black letter military criminal sanctions. They were instated in 1984. Again, this tracks with the rise of neoliberalism. If we look at that, the AVF had been in place about 10 years. And notably, the most profound changes was with the integration of women. And it resulted in a lot of high-profile trials, demotions, and resignations of accused male leaders. And we still see that periodically popping up today. The basic thing we have to remember about adultery, this violation of Article 134, paragraph 62, is that it undermines the oaths that were made. It implies favors granted to people who maybe shouldn't have gotten those favors. And it erodes community trust in these military environments. Examples. Colette says people cheat, they lie, they're not very forthcoming about their marital situation. And when you've got like 50 smoking hot little girls who just came out of training and they'd hump walls at that point, it's your chance. That's how I look at it. And then Rachel talks about a situation where she was in this unit, again, another training environment. And she says there was this girl who was having sex with one of the cadre there. And they had some kind of a function, a military function for families. She said this girl who was having sex with one of these cadre members was playing with the wife's children and smiling in her face. And all the while she was secretly, and I was like, wow, okay. I think it would be the perfect situation for someone who was looking at that, a hookup or an affair. Like I said, the wife doesn't know. She's off base, and these girls aren't here in your life every day like a traditional affair, like you would have at the workplace. This is only going to be her momentarily and leave. Yeah, very convenient. So the discussion to this point is...
Sorry to interrupt.
Yes,
really quickly. Could we just wrap up maybe in 30 seconds and then we can open for some more questions just so people can get those in before we leave?
Sure. Okay. We've talked about all this, sexual arenas. Women are being seen as sexual objects, which therefore lends them to sexual violence. Corrosion of loyalty, values, morale, and readiness. Training to eradicate MSV has failed. I think we can all agree on that. And the DoD commitment to combating this is restoring moral fitness. And the statement is an attitude of alertness and responsibility on a moral level. So we're not just looking at this legal anymore. Now we're looking at it as a moral issue. Aha, this is my conclusion. The gift, Mauss's concept of the gift. Gifting is obligatory. Nothing is free. Gifting creates boundaries, respect, and trust. This is the point I was trying to get to. This one is when I was like, what is happening? Consensual sex is a form of gifting. It is sharing. It is intimate. The expectation has been reciprocal for the most part. Easy access has changed the script. Let's see. The transiency of sexual one use nullifies the intent of gifting of self to one another. Hooking up negates the gift. Power sex exploits the gift, and adultery misappropriates the gift. As a cohort, women are vulnerable to MSV. Desexualize the military workplace. I'm not sure how in the world we would even imagine that. And consider eliminating things like cross-leveling, which really contributes to a lot of transiency. Future research, we're not going to worry about because obviously I have a lot to continue on with this. And that's pretty much it. The gift has the sufficiency to enclose all. We just have to learn how to get back to respecting each other's space, place, and not use each other as a means to an end.